It started like any ordinary Saturday in the Jenkins household. The morning sun filtered softly through the kitchen window as Sarah Jenkins prepared pancakes while her daughter Lily laced up her sneakers. At just 8 years old, Lily was known around town for two things: her deep curiosity and her inseparable bond with her golden retriever, Max. They were a team. Where Lily went, Max followed, his tail wagging like a golden flag of loyalty. "Don't go too far," Sarah called out as Lily grabbed Max's leash. "We're just going to the edge of the woods," Lily shouted back with a grin, her voice light as wind chimes. Sarah watched them from the porch for a moment, her daughter's red hoodie bobbing through the tall grass, Max trotting close behind. It was their favorite trail, one they had walked a dozen times. Nothing ever seemed dangerous out there. By noon, Sarah glanced at the clock with mild concern. The trail loop usually took an hour, maybe two if Lily got distracted by frogs or birds, but it was well past lunch, and the woods were unusually quiet. She walked to the edge of the trees and called out. No answer, just the gentle rustle of wind through the leaves. Then, out of nowhere, Max appeared. He was running fast, his paws kicked up dust as he bounded toward the house, eyes wide, chest heaving. Sarah's heart sank when she saw the state of him, his fur smeared with mud and something that looked like blood. His leash was dragging behind him, frayed and torn. He barked, then spun around and ran a few steps back toward the woods. Then, he stopped and barked again, looking over his shoulder at Sarah. A wave of dread crashed through her. "Where's Lily?" she whispered. Max barked again, louder this time. Without another thought, Sarah grabbed her phone and followed him into the woods. Branches whipped at her arms as she sprinted, stumbling over roots and rocks. Max darted ahead, pausing only to make sure she was still behind him. The trail narrowed, then dropped sharply downhill. Sarah skidded to a stop at the edge of a shallow ravine. That's when she saw her. Lily lay crumpled on a bed of wet leaves and moss. Her red hoodie was torn, and her legs were twisted in an unnatural angle. One arm was bent across her chest, and her face was streaked with dirt. Her eyes were barely open. Her tiny hand gripped Max's leash as if her life depended on it. "Lily!" Sarah scrambled down, half sliding on her knees. She dropped beside her daughter and carefully checked her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" she cried, stroking Lily's hair. Her daughter blinked but said nothing. Only a tear slipped down her cheek. Sarah dialed emergency services with shaking fingers. As she described the location, Max lay down beside Lily, resting his head gently on her shoulder. He didn't move. He just watched her, his golden eyes filled with worry, as if he knew exactly how fragile she was. When the paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, they were stunned to find the dog still guarding her. They lifted Lily gently onto a stretcher. Max tried to climb in after her. "It's okay," Sarah told him, barely holding back tears. "You did good, Max. You did real good." No one could understand how he had done it, how a dog had dragged an injured child through uneven woods, somehow guided her near enough to home, and then ran for help. But that night, as Lily was rushed into surgery for a fractured ankle, mild concussion, and several scrapes, one thing became clear. Max hadn't just saved her, he had brought something back with her, something hidden in her silence, something that the entire town would soon be talking about. Lily lay in her hospital bed, surrounded by the steady hum of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but she hadn't spoken a word since she arrived. The doctors said her injuries would heal, but her silence was something else entirely deeper than pain, heavier than fear. Sarah sat beside her daughter, holding her hand gently. "It's okay now, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe." But Lily didn't respond. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. Only Max's quiet presence at the foot of the bed seemed to bring her any comfort. Hospital policy didn't allow animals in patient rooms, but after hearing the story, the head nurse had made a quiet exception. Max hadn't left Lily's side since they arrived. He would rest his head near her feet, occasionally nudging her with his nose, as if trying to remind her she wasn't alone. And sometimes, for the briefest moment, her hand would twitch toward his fur. It was the only sign she was still trying to hold on. The media had already picked up the story. Headlines read, "Hero dog saves girl from ravine, and golden retriever drags injured child to safety." Reporters gathered outside the hospital, hoping to catch a glimpse of the miracle dog. But the real story, what had actually happened in those woods, remained a mystery, and only Lily knew the truth. That evening, Sarah was joined by her brother-in-law, Andrew, a local attorney who had been helping the family settle some land disputes since Lily's grandfather passed away. Andrew hugged Sarah and glanced at Lily with concern. "How's she doing?" "She won't speak," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "Not even to me." Andrew sat down beside her. "I talked to the police. They're calling it an accident. Said she probably slipped near the ridge." He paused. "But that ravine isn't easy to fall into by accident. She would have had to be walking along the edge." Sarah looked at him sharply. "Lily knows those woods like the back of her hand. She's careful. She's not reckless." Andrew hesitated. "Then maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to." At that moment, Lily's eyes flicked toward them, not her head, her eyes, and for the first time, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Sarah leaned closer. "Lily, did someone say something to you? Did something happen out there?" Still, no answer, but her fingers curled tighter into Max's fur. Later that night, a nurse brought in a small tray of food. Lily didn't touch it. Sarah tried coaxing her, but Lily simply shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Sarah sighed and stepped into the hallway to make a phone call. Max lifted his head. Lily turned toward the dog slowly and whispered one word, barely audible. "Court." Max blinked and rested his head back down, but the word hung heavy in the room, as if the walls themselves had heard it. When Sarah returned, she found Lily's eyes closed, her fingers still nestled in Max's fur. "She said something," the nurse whispered, surprised. "I think she said, Court." Sarah froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. Court? Why would she say that? The next morning, while Lily was still asleep, Sarah opened her laptop and searched for recent legal matters involving their family. One name stood out more than any other: Judge Harold Benton. He was the one who had ruled on their grandfather's property case months ago, giving a controversial verdict that transferred the land to an outside developer. It had broken Sarah's heart, but she hadn't fought the decision. Now she wondered if Lily had seen something connected to that case. She looked back at her daughter and whispered, "What did you see out there, baby?" Max stirred but didn't move. Lily's silence wasn't just trauma. It was waiting for the right moment, and that moment was coming faster than anyone could have guessed. On the third morning of Lily's hospital stay, the quiet routine was broken by a soft knock on the door. Sarah looked up from her chair, where she had dozed off with a blanket draped over her knees. A woman in a navy blue suit stood in the doorway, holding a slim folder and a gentle but serious expression. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said softly, "my name is Dana Ward. I'm with Child Protective Services. May I come in?" Sarah's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" Dana shook her head. "No, nothing's wrong. I was asked to check on Lily. We received a referral from someone who was concerned not about your care, but about what Lily may have experienced." Sarah glanced at her daughter, who was sitting up in bed now. Max curled tightly at her side. Lily's eyes locked onto the woman the moment she stepped into the room. Dana's voice dropped to a warm whisper. "Hi, Lily. I heard you've been really brave." Lily didn't respond, but her fingers found Max's fur again, curling into it like an anchor. Dana pulled up a chair beside the bed and didn't rush. She didn't open her folder, didn't ask questions at first. Instead, she talked about dogs, how she used to have one like Max, and how hers once pulled her out of a creek when she was little. She smiled when she said it, her eyes kind. For a moment, Lily's gaze softened. She looked at Dana, then down at Max, and back again. "I heard you said a very important word yesterday," Dana said gently. "Court, do you remember that?" Lily's body tensed. She turned her face away. Dana didn't press. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. She set it on the tray beside the bed. "Sometimes it's easier to write than talk," she said. "If there's something you want someone to know, but it's hard to say, it's okay to start here." Sarah watched in silence, her heart thudding. Lily didn't move at first. She sat still for almost 5 minutes, while Dana waited patiently. Then, without warning, Lily reached out, took the notebook, and opened to a blank page. She didn't write a sentence, just a single name. Judge Benton. Dana's breath caught. She looked at Sarah, whose face had gone pale. "Lily," Dana said carefully, "can you tell me why you wrote that name?" Lily looked down. Her hand shook. As she drew something next to the name, a crude sketch of a man standing by a tree, There was a small envelope in his hand. Behind him, another figure watched from the shadows. It wasn't detailed, but it was clear enough. Dana slowly pulled the notebook away and turned the page. Was this something you saw in the woods? Lily nodded once. Do you think this is why you got hurt? This time, Lily didn't move, but her eyes welled with tears. Dana stood, gave her a warm smile, and said, "You've been very brave. I'm going to talk to some people, okay? But you did the right thing." As she walked into the hallway with Sarah, Dana's expression changed from kind to serious. "What does this mean?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Dana closed the notebook. "It means someone in authority might be involved in something that shouldn't be happening, and it means Lily may have seen something that was never meant for her eyes." Sarah stared at the floor, her thoughts spiraling. "You don't think Benton had something to do with her fall?" "I don't know yet," Dana replied, "but it's enough to start asking questions. And if Lily's willing, I'll request a closed-door court hearing." Sarah blinked. "She'll have to go to court. She won't be alone," Dana said, "and she can bring Max." Back inside the room, Lily held the notebook close to her chest. Max licked her cheek gently. She still hadn't said a word out loud, but her truth had just found its way into the world, and the world wasn't ready for what she knew. The courtroom doors opened slowly, creaking on their hinges as if they sensed the weight of what was about to happen. It wasn't a normal trial, nor was it open to the public. This was a closed hearing, held in the county courthouse, attended only by legal representatives, court officers, and a select few connected to the case. The air inside was thick with uncertainty. At the center of it all sat Judge Harold Benton, dressed in his usual black robe. He looked as composed as ever, calm, dignified, and unreadable. Most people in the county had grown up hearing his name. He'd ruled on hundreds of cases, shaped property laws, and even donated to local charities. No one would have expected his name to appear on a notebook held by a scared 8-year-old girl, yet here they were. The courtroom held its breath as Lily was wheeled inside by a nurse. Her leg remained in a soft cast, and she wore a pale blue dress with a bandage on her cheek. But it wasn't just the sight of the little girl that made people stare. It was Max, who walked steadily beside her wheelchair, his head high in steps measured. The bailiff frowned. No animals in the courtroom. But before Sarah or Dana could object, Judge Benton raised a hand. "The dog stays," he said calmly. "Let's proceed." It was the first time his voice had been heard since the investigation started. It was smooth and confident, without a trace of worry. But those who were watching closely saw the quick flicker in his eye when Lily looked straight at him. Dana sat beside Lily, whispering encouragement. Sarah sat behind them, hands clenched tightly. In her lap, a court representative introduced the hearing, explaining that Lily had been given the opportunity to speak under protective protocols and would not be forced to testify if she chose not to. The courtroom fell silent. Lily looked at Max. The dog's tail gave a soft wag, like a private signal only she understood. Then, slowly, she leaned forward in her chair and reached for the microphone. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but every word carried like thunder. "He told me I'd fall. If I told anyone," Lily said, eyes locked on the judge. "He said no one would believe me." Gasps spread through the courtroom like a wave. Benton's hand froze mid-motion. His face didn't change, but his jaw tightened. Dana placed a reassuring hand on Lily's shoulder. "Can you tell the court? Who said that to you?" Lily nodded. "That man," she said, pointing directly at Judge Benton. The judge didn't blink. The room erupted. Several attorneys began whispering rapidly. The court stenographer's fingers flew over her keys. A marshal stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene. Benton leaned back in his chair and finally spoke. "This is outrageous. The child is confused. I've never had any private interaction with her. This must be a misunderstanding." But Lily wasn't done. "I saw him," she continued, "in the woods. He was giving papers to a man near the old well. They were talking about land. He saw me watching, and then he walked toward me. He smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. He said it was dangerous to spy. He said I'd lose my balance." A pause. "Then I did." Dana turned to the judge. "You just heard a direct accusation of witness intimidation and possible endangerment of a minor. I recommend immediate investigation." The judge tried to respond, but the courtroom had already shifted. Authority no longer rested in his chair. It now rested in the quiet voice of a little girl who had nothing to gain but everything to lose, and beside her, Max let out a soft growl. After Lily's words echoed through the courtroom, the silence was deafening. It was the kind of silence that comes not from confusion but from disbelief and fear. A respected judge had just been directly accused by a child who had nearly died. Lily's eyes didn't waver. Her voice had been soft, but her words had struck hard. Every person in that room had felt the shift. The moment she pointed at Judge Benton, the walls of power and privilege around him began to crack. Judge Benton cleared his throat. This child is clearly traumatized. She's been through a terrible fall. Her memory is unreliable. But Lily continued, unshaken. I remember what he said. He told me to go home and forget what I saw. He said if I told anyone, something bad might happen. He didn't say it, angry. He said it like a warning. Her hand trembled slightly as she rested it on Max's head. The dog nuzzled her side in return. Dana leaned forward. Lily, can you tell us what you saw that day? Lily nodded. I wasn't trying to spy. I just followed Max down a path I didn't recognize. I heard voices, so I stopped behind some trees. One of the men was Judge Benton. I recognized his voice. He was talking to another man I'd seen at my uncle's house. They were looking at a map. A map of what? Dana asked gently. Land. I heard them say something about ownership, about how the vote didn't matter now that they had the judge's signature. Lily paused to catch her breath. They said my grandfather's land was the last piece they needed, but it was supposed to go to my mum. I remember her crying when the judge gave it to someone else. In the back row, Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lily's voice grew quiet again. They didn't see me at first, but then a stick broke under my foot. Judge Benton looked right at me. He walked over. He didn't yell. He smiled and asked if I was lost. I told him I was just walking Max. Then he said, some places aren't safe for little girls. Accidents happen. That line sent a chill through the room. Lily's hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. I turned to leave. Max was already running. Then I felt the ground disappear. I slipped. I think I screamed. Everything went black. Dana looked to the bailiff. We request an immediate review of this testimony by an independent legal board. Judge Benton stood. This is absurd. She has no proof, just stories. From a child who clearly has a vivid imagination. Lily looked up. You had on a grey coat. You had a red folder with papers. The other man had a bald spot on the top of his head, and he smelled like the woods. Gasps rippled again. The specificity of her memory was undeniable. Dana stood beside her. That's more than imagination, Your Honor. That's detail. And it matches the man we believe she said would list her, a land developer with ties to your last 3 rulings. The judge's face darkened. A marshal stepped closer to the bench, not to arrest, but to stand watch. Authority was beginning to shift. Judge Benton opened his mouth, but didn't speak. His silence now spoke louder than any of his past rulings. Lily sat quietly, her fingers still resting on Max. Her truth was out. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was solid, and it was real. For years, no one had questioned Judge Benton. Now, a little girl in a wheelchair with a dog by her side had shaken his entire world. And outside, the media waited, unaware that the story was about to explode by the following morning. The courtroom wasn't just a place of testimony, it had become the center of a statewide storm. Word had spread fast. A young girl accusing a respected judge of corruption and threats. It was on every local news channel by sunrise, and by afternoon, national reporters had started arriving in town. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, microphones stretched out like arms, hoping for statements. But inside the Jenkins home, Sarah kept the curtains drawn. She wasn't ready for interviews. Her focus was Lily and what would happen next. Lily, still resting in her hospital bed, had been moved to a quieter floor for privacy. Max stayed close, sleeping by her feet, occasionally lifting his head when footsteps passed the door. His instincts told him the danger wasn't over yet. Meanwhile, Dana Ward was already working with investigators. With Lily's testimony on record, the court granted permission for a full review of Judge Benton's past rulings, particularly those involving land transfers, inheritance disputes, and development approvals. The first red flag came from the Jenkins property itself. 6 months ago, Sarah had filed a claim to retain the land her father had left her in his will, but during a rushed hearing, Judge Benton had ruled in favor of a local developer named Edward Lister, claiming the will had inconsistencies. Sarah had been devastated, but without resources or support, she didn't appeal. Now, as Dana pulled public court records, she noticed something odd. The developer's company had been involved in at least 5 cases in the last 2 years, all of which had landed in Judge Benton's courtroom, and he had ruled in their favor every single time. Bank statements and transaction logs began surfacing. Lister's company had donated to a series of community programs that turned out to be shells, of which were tied to accounts managed by the judge's cousin. Emails were uncovered, meetings that weren't on any calendar, phone calls with encrypted codes, but it was a hidden set of surveillance footage that tipped the balance completely. A local hunter, who had set up trail cameras near the woods to monitor deer movement, came forward after seeing the news. He recognized Max from the report and reviewed his old recordings. One video, captured the day of Lily's fall, showed 2 men near the old well, deep in the forest, one in a gray coat holding a red folder, and the other bald, wearing boots caked in mud. The footage was grainy, but it matched Lily's description perfectly. The timestamp confirmed the date. Investigators didn't waste a second. That evening, law enforcement arrived at Judge Benton's home with a warrant. He answered the door calm as ever, but his face barely held its usual mask. Inside, they found a home office filled with sealed envelopes, property maps, and 2 unregistered phones, one of which had recent calls to Edward Lister. Benton was taken into custody without incident. Outside, cameras flashed as he was led down the steps in silence, still wearing his judge's robe. It was a powerful image. A man who once held the law in his hands was now facing its full weight. Back in her hospital room, Lily watched the coverage with quiet eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just reached for Max, who immediately lifted his head and nuzzled her cheek. Dana entered minutes later with a gentle smile. "They're reopening your grandfather's case. They want to talk to your mom about giving the land back." Sarah covered her mouth, eyes full of emotion. "I can't believe it," but Lily could, because in her heart, she had known from the beginning what she saw was real, and now, everyone else knew it too. In the weeks following Judge Benton's arrest, the courthouse saw a transformation unlike anything in its history. His portrait was quietly taken down from the wall outside Courtroom 2. Lawyers who had once spoken his name with respect now avoided it altogether, and deep in the archives, a new team combed through decades of his rulings, searching for patterns, irregularities, and stories like Lily's. But through it all, the center of attention remained an 8-year-old girl and her dog. Lily had returned home from the hospital, though she was still in a wheelchair while her ankle healed. Every day brought her a little more strength, and every morning a new stack of letters arrived at her front door, notes from strangers, classmates, and even people from out of state who had seen the news and wanted to thank her. Some sent stuffed animals, others sent poems, but most sent simple messages, handwritten on lined paper. "Thank you for being brave. You spoke when no one else could. You reminded us that truth matters." Sarah read a few aloud each evening, wiping tears from her cheeks as she did. Lily would smile quietly but never said much about the attention. She didn't seem interested in being famous. She only seemed relieved that someone had listened. But Maxie became a star. News anchors called him a real-life lassie. Animal groups flooded Sarah's inbox with interview requests and offers of awards. A local bakery even made dog-shaped cookies in his honor. The vet, who'd cared for him since he was a puppy, put up a sign that read, "Home of Max, the Guardian." For all the praise, Max didn't change. He stayed close to Lily, rarely leaving her side except to stretch or eat. When she wheeled into the backyard for some fresh air, he trotted ahead, sniffing every inch of grass as if inspecting it for danger. If she reached out her hand, his head was already there before she could even speak. They were more than pet and owner now. They were survivors, partners. That bond hadn't gone unnoticed. One day, Dana Ward returned to the Jenkins home with a small wooden plaque. "This is from the State Child Advocacy Office," she explained, handing it to Sarah. They wanted to recognize Lily for her bravery, but also, she turned to Lily, smiling. They added someone special. Lily read the inscription aloud, "For courage, truth, and loyalty in the face of danger awarded to Lily Jenkins and Max the Guardian." It was the first time Lily laughed out loud since the accident. The sound was soft, pure, and carried through the house like sunlight. Dana sat beside her. "You do know your voice helped more people than you'll ever meet, right?" Lily nodded. "But Max helped me find it." Dana smiled. "I believe that." Later that night, Lily sat by her window as stars appeared one by one. She watched Max snoozing on her bedroom rug, chest rising and falling gently. She thought about everything that had happened: the fall, the forest, the courtroom, the crowd of strangers. It was overwhelming, but one thing stayed clear in her memory: the moment Max had found her in the ravine, the way he'd refused to leave, the way he'd pulled her toward safety. She had almost given up, but Max wouldn't let her. The next morning, a reporter stood on their porch asking for a short interview. "Just one question," she said. "Why do you think your daughter had the courage to speak up when even adults were scared?" Sarah looked at Lily, who was brushing Max's fur on the porch swing. Then she smiled, because her best friend never let her feel alone. 3 months after Lily's testimony, the courtroom was filled again, but this time it wasn't for a hearing or a trial. It was for a ceremony. Officials, community leaders, and families filled the rows. The courthouse hadn't seen this kind of turnout in years. At the front stood a small podium, a banner above it reading, "Honoring the Voice of Courage." Lily Jenkins sat in the front row, still in a wheelchair, but with the cast finally off her leg. She wore a pale yellow dress and a silver ribbon in her hair. Max sat proudly beside her, wearing a blue vest that read "Honor Dog." Cameras flashed, but Lily didn't flinch. She had learned how to sit still under pressure, how to speak when it mattered. As the mayor took the stage, the room quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, glancing at his notes, "we gather today not just to honor a young girl, but to remember that truth often comes from the most unexpected places." He looked directly at Lily. "This little girl reminded all of us that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, and when we choose to listen, everything changes." Applause filled the room as Lily was invited to the stage. With the help of her mother and a cane, she walked slowly to the podium. Max followed closely behind her. A hush fell again as she took the microphone. She looked out at the room, not afraid, not uncertain, just steady. "My mum told me not all heroes wear capes," she began, her voice soft but clear. "Some just have fur." Laughter and warm smiles spread across the room. "I didn't plan to speak that day in court. I was scared. I thought no one would believe me, but Max believed me. He never left. He made me brave." She paused, gripping the podium a little tighter. "I didn't understand what I saw that day in the woods. I just knew it felt wrong. Grown-ups told me to stay quiet, but Max kept pulling me forward until I was standing in a place where I had to say something, and I'm glad I did." Another round of applause. Some people wiped their eyes. Lily stepped down carefully, smiling as the mayor handed her a medal engraved with the words, "Truth has no age." Back at her seat, Sarah squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you every single day." "I know," Lily whispered, leaning into her mother's shoulder. Max rested his head in her lap, sighing peacefully, as if his job was finally done. Outside the courthouse, a bronze statue had been unveiled, of a little girl kneeling beside a dog, both looking forward. It stood under a plaque that read, "In honor of those who speak when it's hardest, and those who never leave their side." The story didn't end there. Judge Benton was later indicted on multiple charges, including corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction. Over a dozen of his past rulings were overturned. New legislation was introduced to ensure more transparency in property disputes, and Lily's case became part of training materials for judges and investigators across the state. As for Lily, she didn't return to life exactly as it was before. She had grown in ways that couldn't be measured. She started writing short stories at first, then a school essay titled "The Day Max Became My Voice." Her teacher sent it to a state writing contest. It won first prize, but no prize mattered. More than knowing her voice had made a difference. She had changed more than just a courtroom. She had changed minds, hearts, systems, and whenever anyone asked her how she did it, she never gave a long answer. She would simply smile and say, "Because Max knew I could."